When I was a youngin', up until middle school or so, I was kind of a wuss. There were a lot of things that I was afraid of, so much so that I'd go to pretty crazy lengths to avoid them. I would get scared just listening to my friends summarize the plots of horror movies that they had seen. I specifically remember being freaked out by conversations about The Ring and One Missed Call. You know, that might actually be why I hated answering the phone so much. But there was one movie that struck a particular nerve with me. One film that shook me to my fucking core. That's right, I'm talking about Saw. If you're not familiar with Saw, here's a quick rundown of the general plot. The Saw franchise centers around a man named John Kramer who loses his unborn son and is diagnosed with terminal cancer. Understandably depressed, John tries to kill himself by driving his car off a cliff, but it only ends up seriously injuring him. Crawling from the wreckage, John realizes that until a person is face to face with death, it's impossible to tell whether or not they have what it takes to survive. John therefore takes it upon himself to impart this lesson onto others by kidnapping them, placing them into elaborate torture chambers, and making them injure and maim themselves in order to escape. Although John himself dies at the end of Saw 3, his disciples Amanda Young and Mark Hoffman take on the mantle and continue in his place as the Jigsaw Killer, following detailed instructions he left in his will. I have quite the storied history with the Saw franchise. When I first learned about their existence in elementary school, I was terrified. The idea that I could wake up and suddenly be forced to hack off my own leg?
No! God, please, no! No!
One asshole in my class described the needle scene from Saw 2 in such graphic detail that I could barely fall asleep that night. But as the years went by and more Saw movies started to come out, I started to get a little horror curious. I started reading things like creepypastas and Stephen King books, because there weren't any jump scares I could take them at my own pace. Fast forward to the summer of 2011, I'm a 13-year-old kid at summer camp, and wouldn't you know it, my friend Jeremy is describing the most recent installment of the series, Saw 3D. At this point, I'm still too scared to actually watch any of these movies, but I'm curious. I'm morbidly curious. So a few days later, I go online and look up every single death trap that the Saw series has to offer. All 52 of them. I even started making up some of my own, and I'm realizing now that that doesn't make me look very good, does it? After a year or two, I sat myself down and said, "Luke, you fucking coward, you've poured hours of research and thought into a movie that you're too afraid to watch. Just sit down and fucking watch it. You can watch it on your laptop in broad daylight, taking breaks every 15 minutes for all I care. Just watch the fucking movie." Now, I'm not trying to put down anyone who's afraid of horror movies, because I've obviously been there before. It's just that I had invested so much time and energy into thinking about this series that I had no reason to be scared of it anymore. And sure enough, I wasn't. Putting aside the mixed bag of my guilty pleasures that is the Saw sequels, the original film is a great horror mystery. It's intense, it's creative, it's really fun, and it's really 2004. Saw was my gateway into the world of horror, and it opened my eyes to the fact that being scared can actually be really, really fun. But now, a full 15 years after the release of the first Saw film, I think these movies are as relevant as ever. That's because the Saw films serve as gruesome reflections of conservative attitudes on healthcare and rehabilitation. Look, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is literally Jigsaw, but they sure have a lot in common. Except, Jigsaw is clever, eloquent, and decidedly anti-Nazi. One opinion that I've heard before from conservatives is that if someone is sick without insurance and can't afford the necessary medication or treatment, it's because they didn't try hard enough to get themselves out of that situation. They could have gotten themselves a second or third job. These people are suffering because they didn't want to not suffer hard enough. God, I feel dirty just for saying that. These disgusting beliefs seem to come pretty close to those of John Kramer. John's argument has always been that he never actually killed anyone, that each of his games can be won, and all the people who lost only died because they didn't want to win hard enough. Let's look at the types of people that Jigsaw chooses to place in his games. Jigsaw claims that his victims are completely deserving of his actions, but I'd argue that the only one in the first film who's actually guilty of anything is Mark, the scam artist who faked an illness. Amanda, the first victim to survive one of Jigsaw's games, only committed the crime of being addicted to drugs. Reminds you of what some other people believe about addiction, doesn't it? And then there's Paul. Jigsaw kidnapped Paul because... You know what? I'll let Jigsaw tell that story himself.
Hello, Paul. You are a perfectly healthy, sane, middle-class male. Yet last month, you ran a straight razor across your wrist. Did you cut yourself because you truly wanted to die, or did you just want some attention? Tonight, you'll show me.
Paul sure was a middle-class male, I won't argue with that, but it's not so easy to prove that he was sane. There's no way that Jigsaw could have proven that, regardless of how much he stalked Paul beforehand. That's victim blaming of the highest order. Jigsaw is #cancelled. In all seriousness, though, that's pretty emblematic of how a lot of conservatives view victims of depression, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts. Like, I get why you wanted to kill the murderer who got out on a technicality, but pardon me for saying that maybe drug addicts and suicidal people shouldn't be on the receiving end of your special brand of vigilante justice. But Luke, you might be saying, there's no way that conservative lawmakers have the same beliefs as a fictional serial killer. And sure enough, you're actually completely right. That's because John Kramer believes in Medicare for all and the abolition of private health insurance. I'm not even joking. The plot of Saw 6 centers around Jigsaw successor Mark Hoffman following through with John's will by kidnapping the entire staff of the Umbrella health insurance firm. William, Umbrella's VP of claims, must traverse a massive gauntlet in which he's forced to choose which of his employees will live or die. There's even a politically charged flashback scene where John himself tells William why what he does is seriously fucked up.
These politicians, they say the same thing over and over and over again. Healthcare decisions should be made by doctors and their patients, not by the government. Well, now I know they're not made by doctors and their patients or by the government. They're made by the fucking insurance companies.
John Kramer, welcome to the Resistance. So despite the fact that William is able to navigate through a giant torture chamber, scalding himself and having holes drilled in his hands in the process, Jigsaw still places his life in the hands of the widow and son of a man who he denied a claim to. And you better believe that Roderick pulls that fucking lever.
I'm going to kill you. Literally, kill you.
So yeah, Jigsaw believes in universal healthcare even though his signature brand of rehabilitation closely resembles that of the conservative healthcare model. So why is that the case? How do we make sense of this cognitive dissonance? Here's what I believe. Despite his lefty take on healthcare, John Kramer, and I don't mean Jigsaw, I mean John Kramer, is a deeply selfish man. John could have gotten Mark to kidnap any insurance firm he wanted, and I'm sure there's plenty shadier than Umbrella. But John specifically chose Umbrella, and he did it because they rejected his insurance claim. One of John's victims in the very first movie is Dr. Lawrence Gordon, the oncologist who had the unfortunate task of breaking the news to John that he was dying of cancer. Talk about killing the messenger. John didn't feel compelled to put many rapists or murderers into his games, did he? Yeah, there were a couple, but not many. No, John chose people that he wanted to see suffer. That's why it was so important to him that he was always there to experience the fear firsthand. Everyone who ended up in one of Jigsaw's games already had some kind of link to John Kramer, no matter how small. But nevertheless, John tried his best to stick to his own principles of righteous justice and not put innocent people in harm's way anyway. It didn't always work, but at least he tried. Now let's compare the Jigsaw model to the conservative healthcare ideal, which I call the spray and pray approach. Republicans don't care who they're hurting as long as they're not hurting other white male Republicans. So basically they try to harm as many disenfranchised groups as they can through a combination of spiteful legislation and pure incompetence. The difference between Jigsaw and conservative lawmakers is the difference between lawful evil and neutral evil, or chaotic evil if you're Steve King. No matter which way you spin it, there's no justice in what these people do. They don't have principles, they have malice. At least John is trying to help people in his own fucked up way. John Kramer is one of the most fascinating villains in horror history because he never actually kills anyone. Instead, he forces his victims into unfair situations that lead to death more often than not anyway. If that's not the conservative way, I don't know what is. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go lie down because I'm feeling a little lightheaded. What's going on? Oh my god. Oh my... What?
Hello, Luke. I want to play a game.
Who are you?
You take pride in calling yourself an
What do you want from me?
anti-capitalist, and yet, hypocrite
Get me
that
out
you
of here!
are, you consume goods and services in a capitalist society.
No!
Very interesting.
What do you mean? It's not like I have much of a choice.
The real question is, what are you willing to consume to survive?
What do you want from me?
Your game is a simple test of endurance. If you can make it through the next 72 hours, the device on your arm will unlock, allowing you to continue with your life eating pizza and making weird political videos online. Live or die. Make your choice.
Hi, I'm Dennis Prager. If what I'm about to tell you is true, almost everything we most treasure, freedom, beauty, reason, the family, economic well-being, and even goodness, is in jeopardy. Who or what poses this threat? The answer is the most powerful ideology of the last 100 years, leftism. Not liberalism, leftism. Or, if you prefer, progressivism. Leftism destroys everything it touches.